Welcome Classic Rock fans to an episode of Classic Album Review, where classic albums are excavated and explored. And today we're looking at Elton John's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. Liberace used to say, "I don't put on a concert, I put on a show," a maxim that could easily be applied to Elton John, that bejeweled interpreter of Bernie Taupin's lyrics, who has recently, of course, collated his own diamond collection. But at the top of that glitter pile sits 1975's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, which from henceforth is only going to be referred to as Captain Fantastic in this review. Many consider this to be his finest album, even better than the previous conceptual effort, Tumbleweed Connection. I prefer the adjective themed when we talk about this. There's no doubt that the songwriting partnership of Taupin and John crafts supple, poignant and versatile pop, and Taupin's wordplay is evocative and quite striking, especially when combined with John's sensitive reading of a lyric and wonderful ear for music. This album has been described as perfectly balanced, which is not something that could be said of the album that follows it, where hubris and excess and rock of the Westies is as scattered as this album is centred. This album is not filled with chart-topping hits, but it is filled with a kind of personal poetic lyricism and ingenious melodies. And it draws its cover as well. That wonderful cover design is inspired by the Renaissance painting by Hieronymus Bosch, The Garden of Earthly Delights. In 2006, Elton John spoke to Cameron Crowe, if you forgive me for quoting at length. He said, "I've always thought that Captain Fantastic was probably my finest album because it wasn't commercial in any way. We did have songs such as Someone Saved My Life Tonight, which is one of the best songs that Bernie and I have ever written together. But whether a song like that could be a single these days, since it's more than 6 minutes long, is questionable. Captain Fantastic was written from start to finish in running order as a kind of story about it coming to terms with failure, or trying desperately not to be one. And we lived that story." So Captain Fantastic, in the words of Elton John himself, is about those 2 or 3 years of crap that every artist has to go through before they make it. It's an unabashedly autobiographical concept album. My word, such hubris, it had to be the 70s, surely. It is an album which is now considered one of his finest, and also features his wonderful touring band. I think it's the last album to feature his wonderful touring band. Probably the band that dazzled people at the Troubadour in 1970. Featuring the wonderful drum work of Nigel Olsson, a drummer who was whisked away with promises of inordinate wealth from Uriah Heep, who also used to play with the Spencer Davis group, if I'm not mistaken. This album sees Bernie Taupin's lyrics regaling the listener with fraught accounts of his and John's years of struggle as a frustrated songwriting duo before success. And essaying such extravagance certainly wouldn't be stomached in today's climate, perhaps, not unless it was a kind of postmodern, ironic way, I suppose. But this was in the 1970s, the age of feather boas and eyeliner and androgyny, where lots of numerous peacocks preened and showboated their way into the record-buying public's affections. But nevertheless, artistically, both Elton John and producer Gus Dudron have hailed this as the very, very best Elton John record. In 1974, it's got to remember that Elton John was pretty hot property, especially in the US. He'd just been paid an inordinate sum of money for another spate of albums. And of course, the Elton John's Greatest Hits album, which was a huge hit in the UK, spent about 11 weeks and 18 months in the charts, 11 weeks at number one. This album's a slight break from the mould. It doesn't contain some of the gimmickry pop hits that punctuated his earlier albums. In fact, Bernie Taupin in the 1990s expressed his satisfaction with the results. I think that's probably the finest album I've ever made. What's interesting about this record, it went straight to number one on the Billboard charts, yet ironically it's his least commercial record. The songs more or less take a chronological order and progress to the final number, which is Curtains, of course. Taupin has gone on to say that the story that's related on this album effectively covers the period from their first meeting to the Empty Sky album. One curious thing about the sleeve, there was a lyric for a song called Dogs in the Kitchen, which wasn't actually recorded. Bernie Taupin said that it was a poem that he wrote attacking the corporate greed in the entertainment industry. As I said, the lyrics were included within the Captain Fantastic lavish package. It was actually recorded recently by a chap called Joe Ward, who performed it with music he composed. You can find that on YouTube. And lots of wonderful imagery as well as evoked on this album, perhaps reminiscent of the Hieronymus Bosch painting. For example, in this song Tower of Babel includes lines like Sodom meet Gomorrah, Cain meet Abel, These disastrous couplings are poignant here. And Bitter Fingers, of course, which is another wonderful number which vividly recalls a period when the both of them had to write songs for other people. Of course, the narrative guides us through the rise to superstardom of Captain Fantastic and his Western-obsessed sidekick. Sound familiar? And the story follows them as they struggle from these dreadful rented accommodations to the initial first bursts of success. Taupin's affected creations are closely tied in with the biographical details of their own lives. John apparently wrote the music to this album whilst he was on a cruise. I mean, how Elton is that? If we listen to the song We All Fall in Love Sometimes, it has a portent and a melodrama that almost anticipates Someone Saved My Life Tonight. Of course, Someone Saved My Life Tonight is about John's first suicide attempt, where Long John Baldry, who is the sugar bear of the song, talks John out of marrying Linda Woodrow, who is pretty much lacerated on this album by Taupin's lyrics. The whole thing reads like some sort of glam cautionary tale. This album contains some really interesting numbers. Of course, we get the Better Off Dead, which has a thunder to it. Sounds a bit like early Queen, a band that was also represented by John Reid at this time as well. Bitter Fingers, of course, and the number Writing, that has a very country feel. Obviously about Bernie Taupin. This is an eclectic and colourful album in true Elton-esque fashion. It's theatrical as well as stark, and a candid account of Elton and Bernie's struggles. It's a meditation on fame, if you like. This is, of course, before much later on when the pair drift towards pop parody and the sort of 1980s gloss. There was a sequel to this album, of course, 2006 is The Captain and the Kid, an album I must admit I've not actually listened to. Apparently Elton John took time off to write this record, although this record, they spent quite a bit of time on the writing and composing. Many of his earlier albums were dashed out fairly quickly. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road would be an example of that. It was written in 3 days and recorded in 2 weeks. And many have pointed to the complete lack of commercialism for this album with its longer numbers. It's more artistic intent. I mean, it's no Sgt. Pepper or Pet Sounds, but nevertheless, it's an oddity for the Elton discography, I feel. As I've said, it is a musical autobiography, but what's interesting about this record is not just the musical autobiography of Elton, but the autobiography of Bernie Taupin as well. The two are inexplicably coupled on this record. Their personal autobiographies are inseparable and interwoven. By including this counter-narrative, you'd expect it to tangle itself up and ultimately fall on its sequin-clad arse. These interesting perspectives as they move into the mad and maddening arena of pop fame, giving way to the Clive James assertion that a life without fame can be good, but fame without a life is no life at all. I love the way this album is sequenced, the way it flip-flops between the two narratives. You get the Elton-centred numbers like Bitter Fingers, Someone Saved My Life Tonight, and the Bernie tracks, of course, which Tell Me When the Whistle Blows, Got to Get a Meal Ticket. It creates these narrative threads that come together and present the listener with a very colourful, if not fraught, account of the vagaries of show business via these two somewhat dysfunctional individuals. And there's no filler on this record. Every track is meaningful and weighted to tell this specific story. Someone Saved My Life Tonight it has a sense of melodrama. Elton steadily increases the song's intensity throughout with additional instrumentation and backing vocals layering over each other gradually to create an intense and sonic climax in the final chorus and the outro. It's an incredibly emotional song and perhaps arguably the pinnacle of Elton John's career. And this album is devoid of those gimmickry and goofy numbers we used to get on the earlier albums, things like Crocodile Rock. It's also nicely balanced and weighted down by the over-arrangement and over-production of an album like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Interestingly, this album was recorded mid-tour, so Elton's voice sounds a little bit hoarse, a little bit jaded, which thematically perfectly suits the record. In the same way that Brian Wilson's hymnal whine perfectly suits the concept behind Pet Sounds. And Elton John's band at the top of their game on this one, full with this replete with this requisite and exquisite Elton melodicism. In fact, one critic has said that there's a real attention to the album flow and orchestration. So we take the track Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. It opens with that country-themed guitar lick that's very reminiscent of A Friend of the Devil by the Grateful Dead. It sort of develops into this beautiful country pop hybrid, brilliant lyric that begins with the mapping out of the childhoods, with the personal artistic history of Elton John and Bernie Taupin's musical journey. With its plaintive strumming of the acoustic guitar has a melancholia to it that, as it eventually picks up in tempo, as the two boys grow and the song becomes less Flying Burrito Brothers and more Dr. Hook, especially with the electric guitars on the chorus. The Tower of Babel seems to be a song about perhaps miscommunication to a certain extent. There's a line in this which I think is fabulous. The dealer's in the basement filling you in a prescription for a brand new heart attack. I think this song might have a lot to do with contracts and managerial shenanigans. Gus Dudgeon said that a great production begins with a great drum sound, and the Nigel Olsson snare drum is fabulous as the swell of the backing vocals of Davy Johnson, Dee Murray and Nigel Olsson also become a hallmark of that Elton John sound. Bitterfingers as an energy is embodied in that very bouncy piano refrain, I think, about striving for recognition. I love the piano. It sounds like a carousel, perhaps a befitting metaphor for this song. It's a song about having to write songs for other people, perhaps songs you don't particularly feel invested in. Tell Me When the Whistle Blows has a funky vibe replete with clavinet as well. It's a song that communicates this sense of weariness, the sense of being on a treadmill with some syrupy orchestrations almost running counter to the song itself. The guitar communicates a sense of anguish and has what can only be described as a kind of mournful quality to it. Got to Get Me a Meal Ticket has a darker and heavier tone, angrier, compared to the almost reverential and prayer-like Someone Saved My Life Tonight. Better Off Dead, quite a heavy number, full of clatter and drama. I think I've said it sounds like Queen, this one. Queen, as I think I might have also said, was a band represented by John Reid at the same time, while they were making this album, same time as Elton John. Writing, I love this Allman Brothers style guitar on here. This is obviously a song that leans towards the Bernie Taupin narrative. It deals obviously with a songwriting partnership between Captain Fantastic and the Dirt Brown Cowboy. And I love the dual meaning of another line or two. We all fall in love sometimes. There's a sombre ache to it. I could be wrong, but on this one, it almost sounds like a mellotron is being used, especially on the verses. It gives the verses an ethereal, otherworldly quality. But maybe that's the idea. It represents a kind of unreality. And Curtains, of course. I love the psychedelic flavour of this one, as well as the double meaning of the word curtains. Literally as a theatrical reference, but also as a metaphorical sense that everything has come to an end or coming to an end. And this review has to come to an end. I apologise for inconsistencies in the filming for this review. I've had some focusing issues. I don't know what's gone wrong with it, but it's a bloody nuisance. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all for your continued support for being patrons. Just leaves me to say you're staying well and healthy, and in the words of the Grateful Dead song, keep on trucking.